right. Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of CTO Confidential. I'm here with Jeremy Suriel. He is the CTO of Kustomer with a K and the co-founder. And welcome to the show, Jeremy.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Amazing. Yeah. So I'm really excited to dig into where I usually start this is with everybody's origin story. So kind of taking
hmm
you before founding Kustomer. How did you get started into tech? Talk to me about your journey.
Wow. So I'm going to age myself here because it goes way back, back to 1992.
Okay.
Sorry, 1997. Excuse me, 1997. Not that far back. I was always into computers and technology. And, at that time, the internet was like, I was graduating from university and the internet was, becoming a thing and people were starting to get email addresses. And, I remember looking at for my first job and saw this cool little, this tiny little print in the classifieds for some startup out on Long Island. And it was like it was maybe the least money you could spend on a classified ad. Had no bold, had nothing specific, but it just said all the right things, right? It was like, all the cool terms at the time. And, went in there and that's sort of like where I was introduced and met now my really good friend and co-founder, Brad Birnbaum, and some other folks that, I've done, other startups with and who are on our board as well, and really good friends of mine as well. So that sort of kicked off my career. The company was eShare Technologies and, kicked things off and, it was kicked off also the startup environment, right? I fell in love with like, being part of a startup, part of a small team, that just worked hard and had a good time doing it because you're doing what you love, right? And being at the bleeding edge of technology, at the time building socket servers and multi-threaded servers and chat software for, businesses on the internet back in 1997 was like crazy. It was like, wow,
Yeah.
that's pretty cool. Anyway, I'll pause there. Should I continue? I can go on for the whole story if you'd
No,
like.
no, I definitely want to hear more of the story, but I'll ground
Yeah,
the readers. Like for myself, 1997, I would have been in middle school, I want to say. So I would have been,
yeah,
building like GeoCities or Angel Fire sites. So I probably
exactly.
that
Yeah.
just grounding everyone where we're at. I think
GeoCities was
this.
one of our customers, by the way. That was
Oh, uh,
interestingly enough. There you go. That was our chat running that.
it
Anyway,
was it was an amazing time because you just kind of got in there and it was kind of the original website builder, or what some would say is the original social network, though I didn't think of it as a social network at the time. And trying to think of what else. Oh, Java applets would have been like the
hmm
big thing. That would have been like the way that people had done. Because I still remember, I want to say from around Y2K, maybe it was 1999, 2000, there was like a skateboard website that had this chat experience where like you could move these little skaters around in kind of 2D space and like go up next to, and like actually the chat would appear when you like came close to somebody and you could chat with them. And this was like chat rooms now, but when I think back on that, I
yeah,
go, damn, that must have been hard to build.
right,
I am like, holy crap, that was like better than most chat experiences today. And it was like,
yeah,
it must have been really quite difficult.
seriously.
Not to mention you tied up the phone line the whole time you were doing it. So it's
But yeah,
like,
that's funny. Yep. Going way back to Java applets. That's right.
yeah,
Good
yeah. So
stuff.
this very, very interesting. That would have been the way you
Yeah,
did that, or maybe Flash was a thing then too,
Flash
I
was
think.
becoming a thing. Yeah, yeah.
So
That was a little
that's
later
very
on, a couple
interesting.
years further. That's when I think Flash started really
Yeah,
kicking it
yeah, right.
off.
That would have had to have been later. Yeah, and then I think Dreamweaver was probably the
hmm
everyone's original IDE, and that was
Right.
how it's funny. I started. That was really it. It was using like Dreamweaver,
hmm
and that was post like GeoCities, things like that. And then I actually kind of like was gone from tech for a period. Like I didn't really get into it again until after college. I didn't think that being a website developer was actually like a viable career. I think that I knew some people that did it, and my parents made, but that was not a people built websites for businesses, but there were a handful of bigger players maybe. But I later learned that actually this was a great entry point in.
Mm.
So I'd love to hear going back to that time though. What were you guys building? What was the tech?
Yeah, so it's interesting, right? Because we had, we were doing, I don't know, it was like C++ back then, and building socket, socket layers, chat servers effectively. We had chat clients, Java based was at the time, the thing to do. And, we had started out building these like chat servers for these communities, right?
Mm-hmm.
But like very quickly realized like, all right. And we were, companies like Lycos and GeoCities, those would be the names that I would, point out there. And very quickly realized like, okay, it's not a lot of money in this. you know, that's just the reality, right? It was a business, and I think saw that this opportunity to, sort of create, to get into sort of customer service, right? To offer chat as a customer service channel, right? So we saw that opportunity, and it was like, okay, I think that's like a better business strategy
Yeah,
than
less
just building these
dangerous
like
too.
skateboarding chat things. Yeah, and so, we basically started building that at that time, very, multi-channel customer service software that had chat, email, and telephone, right? And at that time, you would literally burn it to CDs. Like you would mail boxes and other people would install it. So, we had to like work with different databases. I remember, supporting like Oracle and, you know, all sorts of different, Microsoft SQL Server and stuff. And, you'd have to support these different databases. And then you yourself had to support, issues like, oh, they upgraded their database and that's why they're having the problem. And it's just, it was like pre web distribution. It was weird because you were building this web product, but you just didn't have the it wasn't software as a service yet, you know?
Right, right. You had to send a new CD. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
so
yeah,
interesting because
yeah.
that is something you think about that people forget that software used to kind of just run and you really never updated it. Like like for your average consumer software, you got like Word 98. You installed that. There were no
Right.
patches there was a patch again for Y2K. I remember a guy coming to the house to patch the gateway with the he's like, I got the fix for it. He put some CD in, did some magic, and he's like, now your computer's not going to blow up on the year 2000. And that was like the most that happened. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I remember being in like the server rooms at the time, and you had your own server rooms and, with the air conditioning and, the keyboards that can control the different machines. And, yeah, that was that, that's what it was then. So yeah, that was that for a while. And, you know, there's a little point in time where I and a few friends, we really wanted to move to California because that's like where things were happening, and we had an opportunity to be founding engineers at a company out in California, actually specifically more San Diego. At that time, this was maybe like 1999, we started, we were sort of like looking at what's out there. We saw a lot of like things happening where people were combining, some of these like multi-channel, customer service software with CRM.
Hmm.
Right. And this is like when like Salesforce was coming around, right? So Salesforce was just beginning around that time. And, like you had, I think it was Octane at the time, which later like renamed to Epiphany. And so you had like these players in the space. And so, this was pre-internet.com bubble burst. So we were building that, and it was somewhat, you could think of it as software as a service because we were hosting the software and we actually had people. So if you needed the people to do your customer support, we would do that too. And,
Hmm.
we had raised a boatload of money. We were going to go public. We had a ticker symbol, literally the ECRM, because at the time if you were a cool internet company, you always had like E something.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. E-Trade, yeah, that's
So that was a thing. And yeah, and then you sort of had the bubble burst. So we never went really, never went public. Um, and that company sort of like, went away, took some time off with some friends, traveled a little bit. And, we were like, hey, let's go do something fun and cool. And we're still living in San Diego. I remember we went, did like a Southeast Asia trip. And I remember being on the train and like talking about different ideas at the time. And when we got back, we had this idea of what we called, it was like a GUI, play on GUI, the GUI, graphical user interface, where we're going to make sort of a virtual desktop experience, if you will. And this was like now about 2004.
hmm
We had the communication software stuff, and we built this whole crazy virtual desktop at the time that did almost everything. File management, calendaring, email, instant messaging, this, that, and the other. And we had this like widget desktop thing, and everybody like gave us such crap about, this is not great, and this sucks, and this doesn't work good with Exchange, but we love your widgets, right? And so like we had this widget thing that we allowed people to create these widgets at the time. I don't know if you remember, there was like these virtual desktops with widgets. That was a big thing, right? And there was like open social standards, and there was all these standards for like widgets on your desktop. And the RSS feeds were coming out,
Yeah,
like
yeah, yeah. I
that
remember
was a big
this.
thing. Yeah. So we were like very much in that area, and like we had this whole virtual desktop, super complicated, and everybody like kind of didn't really like it, but they loved our widgets. And we're like, we pivoted. We've like, we were out one day at lunch having, like maybe over margaritas. We're like, yeah, I think we should we should just dump everything else and focus on the widgets. And
Widgets.
we did that. And, we eventually sold that company we were acquired by AOL, and they were like very
Oh, nice.
interested. And so that was like the first acquisition. Here's a startup, just having a bunch, like a great time, super small team, like less than 10 people in downtown San Diego, building some cool stuff, but actually like did something with it. And, so that was interesting. And that company, by the way, we had raised money. I remember we were raising money. We raised a couple, some money. Um, and we had the opportunity to raise, money from Mark Cuban. So
Wow.
that was like an interesting story how that came about. We had like Intel, I think, was also potential, and like I forget, there was one other one, and we went with Mark Cuban, right? And even though he was like the least amount, he was giving us the least, like the worst. It was of the three, the lowest valuation, but we were like, well, A, it would be cool to work with Mark Cuban, and B, I think we're gonna have more, flexibility and more control, or, he's not gonna like super go deep, and he's gonna get it, and he's gonna let us be, free to be as creative as we wanted to be. So we sort of like went that route. That was really cool, and some interesting stories hanging out with him and such. But that was always a good one, because whenever, whether it was follow up companies that we were doing, they were like, everybody was always interested, like, oh, tell me about Mark Cuban. It was
Yeah,
an
yeah, yeah.
easy way to get a conversation with any company, because they would just want to know about Mark Cuban.
It's
That
so
was interesting.
it's very interesting you kind of bring up that too, because I feel like this is something I'm noticing about this new era that we're kind of entering in, where it feels like names, people, distribution, following, like all of this is starting to matter a ton more than it ever did for
Mm,
tech. It used to always be about, the strength of the team, I think. And now sometimes we look at it, even for like good open source software, there's big money in open source now. It's all about, hey, do you have the distribution channels? Do you have that Mark Cuban effect to you? Because it feels like that's becoming a requirement. We're kind of seeing that more and more with people who are trying to raise money, who's we build software for, is really, they want to know that the distribution is somewhat figured out in
yeah,
some
yeah, yeah,
very, very. So it's cool that even though back then having Mark Cuban on your side was an advantage. And this predates Shark Tank, I think, right? This is, I mean,
Yeah,
by
this predates Shark Tank.
by
Yes.
quite a bit. So the average person probably wouldn't have known who Mark Cuban was probably at that
No,
time. It's very outside of the
it's
tech
true. He
industry.
had some kind of like reality show. So it's interesting because I remember when he came to visit once, it was actually like the first time he visited. And we went to this like local spot to eat lunch and we're sitting down and, it's this, the three of us or the four of us, I think, and Mark Cuban. And, a server came over and he's like, you could see like he recognized it. And then, I think we ordered something. And it was like taking a long time. I remember like looking at, I saw this guy running, the server running with like some bag. I think he went out to buy a camera. Again, this was pre iPhone. No one had like cameras on them all the time. And, yeah, like he was buying a camera. So there was some show that people would recognize him from.
So, and it probably was like a disposable film camera at that, right?
Yeah,
Like it would have had to, right? Because
yes,
it's
yes,
like
yes. It was an old school disposable. Yeah, yeah,
just a quick
hysterical.
Kodak. Yeah, it's so interesting when I think back on that time because I think my generation, I'm going to be 39 this year. We're kind of the last generation to grow up without tech and then
Yeah,
have the tech, and sort
yeah,
of like that
yeah.
split is very real for me. And now that I'm raising kids, I try and kind of introduce them to some of these other concepts. Like I did buy a disposable digital camera. It's like, quick, and
Yeah.
they take pictures and they go, I can't see the photo. Like they couldn't see it on the back. I go, I know. We're just going to take the picture and move on with the
Yeah,
vacation.
yeah. They're like, what are you talking about?
Yeah, like we're not going to admire it. We're actually living this
Yeah,
moment, and we're just not going to look at the phone. And we did recently do like a phone that's in the house in the kitchen
okay,
that like hooks up to your cell phone, but the same
right.
concept. Like your friends are going to have to call. And they're going to say,
Yeah.
"Oh, Mr. Rispoli, can I
My God,
speak
you
to?"
did that.
Yeah, I was like, "I'm making your friends do this." I was like, "To
Wow.
contact you." I was
Good for
like,
you.
so,
Good for you.
so
Yeah.
it's very
How old are your kids?
8, 6, and 1.
Okay.
So
Wow.
my 8-year-old is just getting to the age where all of his friends want to FaceTime and they want to talk,
Right.
and I don't give them any devices, and I like
Wow.
by
Good for you.
design, and so it just keeps becoming a question. How old can I be when I get a phone? No matter how many times I say 16, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
They keep making an attempt. So we said, we're going to get you this, like, we were like going to get you the hamburger phone, like the old, I was like, or it looks like a football, I
Yeah.
said, but we're going to try and give you, so now you can at least call your friends, but it's not going to be like obsessive. And
That's
maybe this will
awesome.
help mom and dad stay off the phone on the weekend too. So, people can call the house phone and just, but we definitely have lost a little bit. And I'm seeing more and more tech around this idea of bringing back some of the things that we lost, like these human
Yeah.
interactions, like this digital camera that, it just like
Sure.
doesn't show the photo and it just loads to your phone later.
Yeah.
So I thought it was very interesting. So the part that I lead up to though is your current company, Kustomer, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's interesting because you've been in customer service for a long time.
A
I
long
see
time. Yeah.
customers offering, and I'm curious now, kind of going down this whole, like, where we have AI, we have a lot more channels, that people can do. How are you guys balancing that, like, keeping the human feel to customer service and making it feel natural? I feel like this is a really big challenge that people have to solve for.
Yeah. Yeah. No, this is a great topic. So yeah, look, I think that this is actually one of the things we really focus on, right? And the things that, we feel is, special in terms of like what we're about, right? Like, especially if you think about like companies like, there's a lot of newer startups in the customer service space that are like super hyper focused on using AI to auto resolve conversations, right? And I'm not going to name the names, but I think folks listening to this may know, right? And so, that's good, but at some point, you're not going to resolve 100%. There's going to be many businesses very infrequently are going to solve 100% of these conversations, right? Like I would love to see a real business like where just 100%. And I would say, and I'm going to say like even in the future, right? Like it's going to be a long time before 100%. So even if it's like you get it to 90, that's a great achievement. But what happens to the other 10%? And oh, by the way, even with some subset of the 90%, what if you just wanted a human in the loop to some degree, right?
Hmm.
Maybe it's like you want AI to do 99% of the work, but maybe if it's a cancellation over a certain amount, or hey, this happens to be a VIP customer and they've actually said they like value human interaction, right? I don't know. And so maybe it's a human in the loop scenario where the part of the system that's talking to this end user, maybe for a moment, gives it to a human and a human can be involved. And that human might hit a button that says approve, or the human might just talk and say, yep, just okay, good talking to you, go back. Whatever it might be that the human does in this case when the human is in the loop. So even as part of that 90%, there's going to be folks that want that for whatever
Hmm.
reason, right? And so that's what we're focused on, right? And if you think about the companies that aren't focused on both how human and AI interact within customer service, and they're only incentivized to fully resolve or nothing, they're not going to care. They're not going to be focused on building the experience that is good for both the human and AI. They're only going to focus on the experience that's good for AI, right? So what is that? So that will translate, in my opinion, to many cases where the customer service interaction isn't ideal, right? Where they call it handoff a lot of times. Like literally just throw it over the wall, see you later. And, sometimes when they do that handoff, they throw it over the wall. It might be like a note that gets added to a ticket in some system that people are, some ticketing system that people use. And the note is like not that well formatted because the note doesn't support the formatting. So there's just like a dump of text in like this note object in their interface, and nothing else, is sort of interacting with that other thing, right? Whereas if you're building something that cares about the full experience, yeah, we're going to try to automate 90% too. But we're not, we know that we need to think about the full experience for a good portion, especially now until it gets to that 90%. A good portion of that customer service experience, that conversation, right? And so whether it's the human in the loop, so, things like where it's not just a dump of text, it's a lot of rich information that's filled in, or the human can actually send it back to an AI agent, to continue, like once it gives it its opinion, maybe it hits an approve button, a human hits an approve button, or the human provides some data point back to the AI. Maybe it's a note and says, okay, hey, you can continue moving forward with this. I've, had that conversation. We're good. And you can now move on and finish this thing. Right. And so that's a big difference in terms of like, how we think about the problem, how, answer your question on that, and really what we're focused on, how we feel we're very different than even some of those players out there. And I think ultimately it just goes back to, we're all about building great customer experiences, right? And we've always been about, like, a big differentiator has been about this platform, right? That we're a platform, and I can go into why, but like, what does that mean? Everybody has different things that they want to do. Every business is different, right? Like they're like, oh, we want to see stuff here on the right side of the screen. If I'm, dealing with an order, I want to see all this type of information. Another company doesn't want to see that. They want to maybe automate some things and not see that stuff. And everybody's different, right? Every company's different and they have different goals. And so we've always like strived to create a platform that allows these companies to achieve those goals and to provide the experience both to their end users and to their human agents and admins accordingly, right? And so that's the thing that we're focused on. Obviously AI and human interaction, that's a big part of it, right? And there's a big shift happening on like what that user experience looks like, how it feels. We haven't solved it by any stretch of the imagination. We got a lot of interesting prototypes that we're working on. There's things that are coming out every day that's sort of like getting closer to how we're realizing that vision of where AI is doing most of the driving. Humans are like approving, right? We say that a lot internally here. So I'll pause there. I know I said a lot.
Yeah, no. This is actually a great topic for us because, I run this digital agency and I tell people like the big thing people pay me for, especially now that AI can pretty much write code as well as anybody else, right? Like, calling it what it is here. They pay me for one, the customer service, the experience, the ability to kind of talk back and forth with another human about something can't be understated. And the other thing about, I work with a lot of small to mid-sized businesses, and I think a lot of people are going after that market with tools like you're talking about, the automated booking overnight. They're looking for automated customer service. You can get rid of your staff. This is kind of the thing that people are touting. And what I try to, with software companies, and I wrote a piece on this that I think that it goes all the way back. When I first graduated college, I worked for Enterprise Rent-A-Car as a management trainee. And that's like, I always tell people, if you want to learn customer service and sales, go do that job, because you get abused by the customers quite often, because,
Right.
people have accidents. They've been involved in accidents, but they used to tell us something that when a customer, we were very obsessed with calling customers, or when they left, we always asked, did you have a 5 out of 5 experience? And the metric that
Hmm.
they talked about with that is, if a customer has a 5 out of 5 experience, they will return to your business 70% of the time. If they have a 4 out of 5 experience, just one notch, pretty good experience. 4 out of 5 on Google is
Yeah.
pretty good, right?
Right. Right.
They will return 30% of the
They
time.
drop off.
Precipitous drop off.
Hmm.
For a small business, the customer that they earn is everything. And I learned this with my own business. It is so hard to acquire a customer for a service business, or for most of us out there, that losing a customer over a tiny thing like, they just don't have a human that I could have spoken to. Even if the AI did the right thing and they would have preferred to speak to a human, that moves them from 5 out of 5 to 4 out of 5. They are now possibly going to choose your competitor simply because somebody picks up the phone, or they just
Hmm.
have that option available to them. So I'm always very conscious of software companies when they understand this, because for most software companies, my joke is they have this effect of, I don't really care if we had 2,000 users leave because we shipped a break. We'll fix the break and we'll get 2,000 users another time. Like they just, for a small business, this is every single user,
Hmm.
quote unquote, this impersonal user term that we use in software, it is critical. And especially for your local HVAC plumber, where people have options for these things.
Yeah.
And then the
Yeah.
other side of it that you don't get to is again, going back to enterprise. I remember somebody would call me for a weird request. Like, I need a Camaro. I don't have a Camaro on the lot. I'd go in the computer, no Camaros showing up in the computer system. But then I'd say, just give me an hour. And I'd make like 3 phone calls to another manager. He goes, I do
Yeah.
have a Camaro. He's like, what do you, I go, I'll buy you a beer if you can give me that Camaro, because,
Yeah.
like that kind of human deal
Yeah.
making just can't happen with
No.
AI. Nobody's going to codify the beer buying between managers,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
to,
That's a good
to
one. That's a
make
good
that
one.
happen.
Yeah.
Or, like my favorite example is people go, oh, we booked all these calls for a plumber overnight. I go, wait,
Hmm.
somebody called a plumber at 1 a.m. and they
Right.
and they were able to just wait until a couple of days from now. I'm gonna call bullshit.
Yeah. Yeah.
If I'm calling a plumber at 1 a.m., I need a plumber at 1:01.
Get the
And
emergency. Yeah.
so I
Yeah.
need, and so you like when the dispatcher picks up and goes, I'm going to wake someone up on their cell phone. This is what we do, emergency plumbing. So it's always interesting to me that I think AI, like you said, for all those, that 90% of requests, but then there's the 10% where the love of your brand is built, where the
Hmm.
emergency, the absolute, like, man, if you could make a Camaro happen for me in the next hour, I would love you
Yeah.
forever. If you could come
Yeah.
here when my sink is flooding, I'm always going to use you guys and recommend you guys.
Yeah. And at some point, that 90% of the customers that were within the 90% over time will have something that goes into that 10%. So you're just going to continue to diminish the value, right? And so, yeah, we're on the same page. I think you get it. It's
It, it
important.
it's it's
That's what we believe. Yeah.
it's absolutely, Brian. I love hearing that a software company cares about this, because I think that's the thing that I feel like is lost when I talk to, or when we interview engineers that we look to hire here, because we really do focus on this forward deployed, because you do work with customers here quite a bit.
Yeah.
I'm like, you really, really need to have a background in other places other than just having built software because it really is, you have to be able to empathize with this end user that this is like their livelihood, the customer, it affects real people's lives in these moments. So it's really cool that you have this background kind of going all the way back to the 90s and building customer centric software
Mhm.
and understand that process, which is awesome.
Yeah. No, and I skipped a bunch of stuff. That's fine, but it continued, right? We built other customer service software startups that were then acquired. Assistly being acquired by Salesforce. Spent a bunch of time. I can't tell you how many contact centers I've been in, and watching how humans use things. And so, again, some of this is very pre AI, and but the same fundamentals, and it's definitely helped over the years, right? And so we're in an awesome, interesting time right now. To your point, like AI can write software, right? And so there's a lot going on in the software factory and loop engineering and such, and you know, lots of companies are in that we compete with are doing that, and we're obviously in the process of improving our automation internally. But the fundamentals don't change, right? Like whether you got AI writing software or not, like you can have zero software engineers. No, you're not. So like, why would you have zero customer service agents? Anyway, yeah,
I think I use the example of like digital photography a lot. And I say, now everybody was a photographer, but there was more photography needed than
yeah,
ever before. And
yeah,
we're consuming more media than we've ever done before. For example, I run a podcast. In the 90s, I would have had no business building up. It would have cost me an arm and a leg to make a pod. I would have had to convince a network to do it, or you
right.
would have been on some public access, some like obscure nowhere, So all of the technology just kind of builds on itself. What I'm curious, you mentioned, doing AI, the loop engineering. So from like a technical perspective, what are you guys experimenting with in your workflows with AI in constructing the software? What are you excited about? What's all hype? What are your feelings?
Yeah, look, I think there's a lot more real than hype, which is awesome, and I think why so many people are excited, and you can get lost on Twitter, on X, scrolling through something that someone says, some video or some, new way of doing things. And so it's a really exciting time. From a product perspective, we're doing a lot of prototyping, have a, have a great vision of where we see things going. Again, I sort of gave you the high level of AI doing most of the work, AI driving and humans, reviewers, right? We think that's sort of like where things are going and maybe to some extent where we should be today. But you don't really see a lot of that in the software you have today. And so, I think a lot of people are sort of like, maybe they haven't realized that yet. Hopefully more people do. And, we as users of software will be using software that does more of the thinking for us instead of us having to like doing the hunting and pecking and scrolling and where's that button? Like that is not where we should be today. And so we've got, obviously with this high level vision, and we're doing a lot of experimentation and prototyping, and have a lot of ideas of how that should materialize in our own product. And some of it is, we're actively working on, and some of it maybe actively have private beta folks, playing with some things. And so that is a big part of what's happening in terms of the product right now. And we're very excited by those things, because we think, yeah, it's cool, but it's actually like so valuable. It's so necessary for, if someone's setting up, like you just mentioned forward deploy engineers, and everybody's sort of like, yep, forward deploy engineers. That's what you should have when you're setting up AI. Okay. And I'm not debating that, right? I feel like 100%, if you want to have a successful AI implementation, especially if it's a more complicated one, more advanced, doing a lot of things, you're going to want some forward deploy engineers, like making sure they understand your goals, what's available to them, and iterating and improving, whatever. But the product really needs to be better, right? The product needs to like have, the best practices and, the right ways of doing things baked in and guiding you and maybe preventing you from doing things the wrong way and maybe making the right suggestions and maybe looking at all the data as all the converse in our world as conversations are happening and maybe there's CSAT, and maybe there's AI generated CSAT that you can leverage and then learning and then suggesting improvements to make. And that's why I mentioned the loop engineering and software. Like we're like, yeah, that has to happen on the software side and people are doing it. Like similarly, it needs to happen, inside every product, including our own, right? Like it needs to be where it is self-improving and there's machines running and, the human is still there. And the human ultimately should make the final decision or maybe at least configure when an automated decision should be made or not.
Right,
Um,
right.
you know what I mean? And so we're excited by that. And so in terms of the product, lots going on there. You know, there's some things that, we have an early access program inside our product. So a lot of times, like we've created a way where we can get some of these things out earlier without sort of like GAing it and getting more feedback. And, so we have the normal like release cycles, depending on how big something is, we're going to do things like in a private beta, maybe even an alpha. We have our own alpha stuff that we test internally ourselves. So lots, I'm being very, abstract here and high level, but there's in general, there's a lot of development going on in terms of, getting towards the vision of AI doing a lot of the driving, humans reviewing. We think there's a lot of opportunity for our software to be a lot more intelligent, to apply best practices, to like leave less room to hang yourself effectively, right? Especially as we talk about AI implementations, but really everything else, right? And so anything that you might be a human user doing there, right? Like the software should be guiding you. So we're doing a lot of stuff like that. And then there's this interesting balance with cost, right? So
Hmm.
like, it costs money to use AI.
Yeah.
and, and so like there's pricing has always been an interesting thing. If you look at Salesforce right now and you go to their pricing page, there's like 4 or 5 different ways that they price it all at the
Yep.
same time,
Yep.
right? Like it used to be so simple. It was just seats and then like add on, it was a one-time add on or like seat based, easy, done. Everybody got it. But now some like seats are going down, by the way, right? Or, not increasing at the rate they used to be. And you're using all this AI, right? And by the way, sometimes one person can do a whole lot of stuff with the AI.
Yep. Yep.
So, and then let's say you have proactive support. So we're big on that. It's a lot of focus on that, being more proactive because we believe the best customer service experience is one you never had to have, right? And I give you examples of that. I don't know, maybe you have your own. I have this interesting story where like, I was living in a new place and I had, some thermostats installed and it was like a Google Nest thermostat. And, all of a sudden I'm working one day, it was a Tuesday afternoon or something. I get this email and it's like, hey, we detected that your thermostat's losing power and that shouldn't happen. And we think they had a diagram in the email. We think it's a C wire. I don't know if you know anything about thermostats. It's a C wire. Um, and we have this adapter. We normally charge $25 for it, but we'll just give it to you for free. If you just click this link and give us your address. And I was like, from a customer support perspective, I'm like,
Wow.
boom, right? Like that
Wow. Wow.
was
Wow.
awesome, right? Because what would have happened instead? What would have happened instead is I wouldn't have got that alert. Maybe a day from that, and it was in the summer, it was hot. Maybe like a few days would go by, and all of a sudden I'm like, why is it so hot in here? Sweating. I'm getting ready to do this call, and I can't just stop. So now I'm just sitting here sweating as I'm doing the call. And at some point, I got to take time out of my day to go figure something out. Why is it? And we've all, maybe you've seen like Nest thermostats. If you had one,
Yeah.
you had to pull it out of the wall, plug it into your computer. Get, like, you just lost 90% of the people out there. Like, they're never
Right.
going to do
Right.
this.
Right.
Then it's like, where's Google's phone number to call them? Good luck finding
Nowhere.
that.
Right.
So you see what I'm saying? Like, this is the reality of customer support today, right? And so like, we're spending a lot of time thinking about proactive, and we've always been about proactive with our platform and automation, but now AI makes that a lot easier. So, going back to the pricing, it's like, okay, we have all these amazing ideas. Some of them are like literally sitting on the shelf, we're ready to go. But it's like, we can't push this out yet because we will lose money, significant amount.
Yeah.
So we've got to, update pricing. We got to figure out the right pricing. And then on the pricing side, people don't like complicated pricing, right?
Right.
Like, I don't know if you have like the Claude license where it's like $200 a month or $100, right? The Ultra,
Yeah, yeah,
whatever.
that's what I use now. Yeah, it's like the
Yeah,
GPT $100 one, but I had the
right,
Claude 200 for a time. Yeah.
right. But like, they're kind of going away from that because they're losing a whole lot of money. But we love it because it's like super simple because it's like, okay, $100, I can do whatever I want. I'm good. And so, you know, there's that balance of like, so figuring out something boring like pricing and limits and costs is so essential to getting out all this value and making it simple enough so that the business, you know, understands it. And so that's why a lot of times you hear about this outcome-based pricing, and it's all the thing, that's the new way to price
It's
it.
hard.
Yeah.
I mean, my business has been after that for a long time, in agencies, because, estimates are always wrong when it comes to building software, unless you're building something you've already built before. You
Yeah.
basically, the old way is there were one of two ways. You get a list of features and you make up the hours on the right-hand side. You multiply that by some margin of error. And then you multiply that by some price and you're like, well, hopefully I don't mess that up. Or you do time and materials based. But now, where's the incentive to use AI if time and materials is the thing you're charging for? Because now it's like, okay, now my hour has become a lot more valuable, but in the marketplace, they don't see it. So then people are like, well, what about tokens? And then I go, yeah, but tracking tokens, that's not exactly an easy thing to do. You bake this
Yeah.
into your software, just throw a meter on your software. I go, have you ever put a
Yeah.
meter on an API endpoint? It's not exactly like an easy thing
Right.
to do.
Right.
It's all these things start coming together and I'm asking myself, what is the new pricing model of the future?
Yeah.
I think it's value based, but
Yeah.
again, what is the value when you've just done see, people can't get out of their head around the time where it's like, yeah, but it still only took 14 days. Like,
Yeah.
regardless of
Yeah.
how much
Yeah.
value I got out of it, you were
Right.
done with the app in like 2 weeks. So I'm
Right.
only willing to pay so much
Right.
for that. So you got to think about some of this when it comes to our software. And I don't know where we land. What I do know is that the AI is pretty heavily subsidized, as you said. So I still am always looking at the open source models because I'm like, look, it's only a matter of time before that $100 a month plan or $200 a month plan gets taken away and you start having to pay. And I'm very
Yeah.
reluctant to use Fable or even GPT 5.6
Mm.
because
Mhm.
I feel like there's an edge to being able to accomplish more with the lower models. And and I don't want to lose that edge. Now some may say, isn't there an edge to knowing how to code? I go, yes, that too. I was like, you still should. But I did spend some time this week. I want to say Monday, Tuesday this week, while my agents were working on some stuff, I had this idea for a library and I said, I'm going to write it by hand because I just want to
Wow.
get back. I'm going to do that.
Right.
I'm going to, and let me tell you, after 2 days, I did say uncle. Like it is at a point hey, just do
It's
this. It
crazy.
was
Isn't that crazy? Yeah.
it
So that's
was,
that. Think about that. So, you asked like, what am I excited about? Like, you know, the fact that like software could write software.
yeah,
That, like, so when we talk about that loop engineering, and it's like right now you're like, forget it. Writing it yourself, crazy. Which is
crazy.
wild to think because not that long ago, that's what you did for a
It
long time, you
truly
know?
not that long ago. And I
Not that
think
long
about it.
ago.
I go, was I always? It was always that slow. It
Yeah.
literally,
Yeah.
it was
Yeah.
so. I said
It's wild.
it literally took all this time. And at the
It's
time,
wild.
I didn't even have AI. Like I used AI as the assistant next to me.
Right.
So as I'm writing things, it wasn't.
Right.
remember you'd have to go to Stack Overflow, you'd have to read a thread, you'd have to
Yeah,
go to the
yeah,
docs, you'd figure it
yeah,
out. I didn't even have to do that. I literally could stay in writing mode and let the agent just correct me as I go. And it's still, I was like, okay, oh my God, I got to make 3 more files. I got to copy
yeah,
this. I got to type
yeah,
this. I'm going to copy and paste this over into that file. Let me just let the agent do all of that. And so it was interesting to do, because one of the things that I think was a benefit of that approach, and I did write about it, was that I was able to think more slowly about the solution. So I think that one side effect of AI is we've gotten away from, sometimes, especially if you're doing a lot of loop engineering, you don't think as much about the product, because you're
yeah,
just so focused on being productive that you can let it get away from you. And I knew
yeah,
that getting this core correct, and by actually writing it, I'd like look at it, I'd look at how I was going to use the library, and I was like, I don't like the way that looks. And so I was able to kind of like think about that in a very in a just a more kind of felt way. But I don't think I would hand code like that. It was just I wouldn't go back to doing that again.
yeah. No, it's crazy. It's like when I'm on a plane and there's no internet, I'm like, oh, I guess I can't code.
Yeah.
Because,
Well,
you
because you
know,
get off the plane and everything you did on the plane will be done in 5 minutes.
yeah, exactly. So it just like doesn't even make sense anymore, right? But yeah, yeah, it's really interesting how quickly that's changed. So we are also equally excited by that and how we can improve, this like software factory, not just to build new things, but like actually, again, it goes back to like customer impact and value, right? So like, if you have, let's say, a backlog of bugs, like, can we eradicate backlogs of bugs? I
Yeah.
think you can. Like, that's freaking cool. Or, you always have situations where like, there's like UX tweaks and improvements you can make, and maybe you have Slack channels where people are talking about it. Can you just make that like, instead of those UX tweaks sitting, let's say, linear for months, right? Maybe they're just like automatically happening, right? And people could see it, right? And you're not even an engineer. You're just the factory allowed for that to happen, and you can actually go and play with it at some like dedicated URL in your staging environment or something, right? Like that's pretty cool, right? And so like very excited about those types of things, right? So that we can, get out of the way of like doing all these smaller things that look, they're important, but now we can focus more of our attention and bandwidth on these bigger things, right? So that's really, really exciting. We're sort of in the early phases of that. And that's a big part of, what I'm excited about as well.
Yeah, well, I think that the other thing that's changed for me is the way I approach an MVP is very different, and what I would make
Mm,
configurable, because this happens, and it's funny because you can tell the AI was trained in a pre-AI era. If you ever encounter these types of prompts where it'll come back and it says, "I suggest you skip this for the MVP because take too much time," and I go,
right.
"Nah, you're not going to skip that." I go, "What are we talking? Another 30 seconds?" Like,
Yeah.
I was like, "I'm going to make you do it,"
Yeah. When it, when
or
it comes out with like dates, like, oh, this will take 3 months and 6 months. And you're like, okay, just do it all.
just do it all right now. And it's like, all right. It's like, what are
Yeah.
you trying to insult me? Like, if you had to do this by
Yeah.
hand, it would take 6 months,
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's,
Yeah.
and then the other thing
It's
is
funny.
making admin panels. There are things that I would have
Mm,
like hard coded as like an enum of values, let's say like a state of something, or,
sure. Sure.
and now I'm like, actually, I want you to add an admin panel that a non-technical user can go and update and reorder these. And
Yeah.
that would have added a lot more complexity to the software if I was handwriting it. But now I'm like, well, now that doesn't have to be a ticket 6 months from now when you're like, we need a pending status on a customer service phone call. It's like, oh, well, you could just go to the admin panel, add pending, stick it into, so the
Yeah.
things that I'm able to bake into the
Yeah.
software for the kind of administrators of that software are so much better, which is where I think that true software engineering ends up going, because now it's like, hey, no, I definitely don't want the, everybody just sitting in Replit at the whole company just making
Right.
changes left and right. That's not realistic for a pro.
No, no, no. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But I'm going to bake in more options for you to be able to handle things.
No, it makes sense. To your point, you mentioned something really interesting, right? Like going from like 0 to 1 or prototyping, whatever. What's very exciting is that it's almost become less expensive. It's very cheap to prototype, right? Like you can basically very quickly go from a concept to being able to touch and feel something and play with and get that full understanding of whether that thing's going to work or not within minutes and throw it away and try it again. And that, if you, that to me is amazing, right? Because if you think about in the past, you have to invest so much time. And then
My
once you
God.
invested that time in that prototype, I mean, how many of us prototype something and it became the thing? You
Yeah.
know,
And you're
right? It
like,
was
no.
like, okay, like keep going, and make it real now. And like you would have maybe done it a little bit differently, right? So, you can actually just sort of really prototype 0 to 1 very quickly, see something, do that a couple times over and over again, get it much closer to the vision you're looking for and see it working, get everybody's opinion, and then go do that. And that's pretty incredible, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. The other side of this too, I think it's been easier for maybe folks like yourself or myself that have gone and founded companies and gone into management because, one of the weirdest feelings is when I've built something and I still build a lot of software around here and somebody's like, well, what was the business logic? And you're like, can we check the spec? Like
Right.
I didn't write it. So I literally just wrote 6 months of software in 6 hours. I need to ask the person who built this to figure. For a manager, I think that feeling you become familiar with that because I said normally I would have dispatched that to a team, and then someone would have asked a question. I'd say, hey, you know what? I either have to look at the code or I have to ask the person who built it real quick, like what was the logic you used in that spot. Whereas people who have been ICs for a long time, I think that feeling is super new to them, where then it's very
Yeah.
uncomfortable.
Yeah. Yeah. Very true. Very
So
true.
you got to get used to this idea. You're not going to know every aspect of the software. You're going to kind of know these specs, tests, but it's now the next kind of piece of where I always kind of pivot these conversations now is a lot of what I've done to build loops, to build factories. What you've done is comes with tons and tons of experience, right? Handwriting software. The question I have is where do people get that experience now if you're new? If you don't, if like we said, handwriting software is crazy talk.
Yeah.
You're probably going to do that in college, just like I had to hand make maps for my geography degree, even though nobody hand draws a map anymore. But
Yeah.
where are people going to like? How
It's
do
a
you
great
get that?
question. It's a great question. Like, so almost I want to answer it in two different ways, right? Because like from one perspective, maybe you don't need it. Like, I'll go back to jQuery. I was writing front end interfaces before jQuery. And I don't know if you've been in that world, but like, I remember being like, oh, Netscape supports this, but like
Yeah.
Microsoft,
Ugh.
like, Explorer doesn't support this. Then 3.1, you really need 3.2 to do it. And like, it was a disaster, right? And then all of a sudden, jQuery came out and like, this is amazing, right? Like, I don't have to worry about this. It's just everything's jQuery. Life is good. And then, we had like, you've had React and you have all these other things that have come since. And like, how many people really need to know like the DOM? Like,
Right.
and like how to like initialize the page? It just, or when
Or the
I
doc
remember,
type declaration. I remember. Yeah.
right,
XHTML. Yeah. Yeah.
right. And I remember, like, I don't know, before like ASP.NET or ASP, we were writing IIS, you know, DLLs, right? Like, it ran code inside your web server, like, and you had to recompile it. And I remember being like, wait, you could just have this session object and just like script it. And this is incredible. Oh my God, we could go so much faster. So where am I going? Like, how many people, even engineers today, know a lot about like the innards of HTTPS and, and all of those protocols, right? And like why they're there and why they exist that way. And so, you know, I, I do think as someone who has, you know, gone through, classical education with computer science and like gone through all, pre AI world and written multi-threaded servers and gone through all the pain. Like I value it a lot. Don't get me wrong, but it's like you kind of have to just be real. Like, there's so many of those examples I can give, or, you were an assembly engineer. Like how
Yeah,
many
yeah,
people
yeah.
have to think about assembly? You're like, thank God, right? We don't have to think about it. So, like, is there, we should be okay. It's not bad that there will be a time where people don't really need to know some of those things and call themselves software engineers. Like, I think it's okay, you
I
know?
agree. I agree. It's an interesting because I came in. You mentioned jQuery when I started doing this professionally. jQuery had just come out, and it was MooTools, Prototype, and Scriptaculous and jQuery.
Right. Yeah.
And I started learning those libraries because we were building a lot of websites, and people said, no, you got to learn. There were the old guys who were like, you got to learn vanilla JavaScript. You got to, you did the library. But I wrote with the library for years. And then suddenly jQuery wasn't cool anymore. And we went back to vanilla. Guess what? I picked up vanilla JavaScript, no problem. It
Yeah.
wasn't like I didn't, but then
Yeah.
React came along.
Yeah.
There was like an Angular JS moment in there, and I was really
Yes, yes, it
hoping that
was.
that was yeah. And it's
I
like all
remember
right,
that.
and then they go to React, but then I remember going to an interview, and admittedly their whole stack was built in React, but they made me do DOM manipulation, like going back to
Nice.
it was just it felt like I was all thumbs. It was
Yeah.
I couldn't because I had been writing React for so many years, which really discouraged DOM manipulation. And I knew somewhere in the back of my mind, I knew how, and I was like, what's the thing? And you totally forget. So
Yeah,
even
totally.
having been through the pain, it was just like, I don't need
Yeah,
that anymore.
exactly. Exactly. And so this is an interesting topic. Again, if I could really quick, right? Because, and I think a lot of maybe CTOs are thinking this and are already acting on it, right? Like you think about like your recruiting
hmm
and your job descriptions and the hiring loop and what you're looking for. you know, there's an AI transformation happening there, right? And maybe even the level of the candidates you're looking for, right? Like, some people maybe they're thinking, well, I don't know if I need to look for junior level candidates anymore. And there's like the flip side, where it's like, hey, if, that example you just gave, anybody can learn. If you're a software engineer, you can learn the DOM or some JavaScript technique or library or whatever. But like you're not going to teach someone how to like to be a problem solver or not, or to be passionate about technology or not passionate, like to be motivated, to, work hard. Like that's going to be much more difficult to teach, if not
Yeah.
impossible. So like when I'm looking for candidates, I look for those fundamentals, right? Like, yeah, for you to have gone through schooling is great because it shows that you were passionate about it. Like you
hmm
spent 4 years of your life and, so that tells me something, right? And yeah, you're going to know some of the fundamentals. So that's good to know. It's like, great. Like I want you to have as much fundamentals as possible, but if you can't, reverse a string off the top of your head with no AI, like, yeah, how many of us, like, can we really do that right now? If he's like, go, build the function. Like, let me go. Like, it's like, it's not what we need to look for. We need to look for people who have all those other qualities I mentioned. And so, I think, it's sort of related to that other question there, right? Like, I think fundamentals are important. It's not like the top of the list of what I expect you to regurgitate. Like, I do think as you level up, I would expect you have the experience of building highly scalable, especially in our world, highly scalable systems, or maybe you're familiar with security techniques. You're familiar with, those things as you level. Like, yeah, you kind of have to, you need to know those things, and you're going to need to guide other engineers and lead other engineers. But like, again, some of these like lower level things, I don't know how long they're going to be necessary or if they're even necessary today.
Yeah, it's very, very interesting because I've gone back and forth on this where I think that like if I talk to a young engineer, I'm always like, the coding interview is still a large part of a lot of people's interviews. I don't do it myself anymore, but I do still think you have to be prepared for the idea that a bunch of companies you may want
100%
to work at are going to
are
make you
going to
code
do.
in front of it. Yeah, and
Yeah.
like be
Yeah.
prepared. It's
Yeah.
now I think the smart ones are going to really try and help see if you're doing this loop engineering thing. And this is, I've seen this a little bit on Twitter, and it's, how are you thinking about loops? And what I and I always say, this new thing they're talking about with graphs. I said, that's not new. I go, if you were doing loops and you were a reasonably good software engineer, you were already thinking about, how do I take an error response and pattern
Yeah.
match it to a different part of the, like a different section,
Yeah.
a different state machine, effectively
Sure.
working through state machines. And I think that applying that knowledge to what is the new AI is going to be the thing that we're looking for. Are you broadly, what used to be the architecture part of the interview? I remember you'd have to build like a link shortener on a whiteboard, and you didn't have to, and it
Yes.
was just like,
Yes.
okay, now 2,000 people come in, and you're trying to, and you're broadly concepting. And then the other part of the interview was, okay, now we're going to build a slideshow in React. And we no longer, thank God.
Right.
There's never been something in my life that I've never been more willing to give up than the rebuilding of slideshows, from
Yeah.
jQuery to JavaScript to React to Angular,
Yeah.
all these different frameworks. I said, it's literally the pattern I'm so glad that AI got rid of. But
Nice.
now it's
Nice.
really going to be this broad. And the books that I think about are, there's an old book that's called Code. It's like the language of software, and it's so well done. He talks about like Braille and how computers work with logic gates. Again, broad concept. I think it's so great because it's readable for someone like me who doesn't have a computer science or a discrete mathematics education. I feel like he explained it so well. And then there's another one that very famous, The Pragmatic Programmer. I think it's like Andrew Hunt, and but it doesn't focus on one language. It's just very, very broad concepts. And I think about that a lot as is the programming book of the future picking up a book about JavaScript, or is it picking up a book about programming languages that's very broad? This is what functional programming looks like. This is what object-oriented programming looks like. This is how, something like the JVM works versus Beam versus something
Yeah.
like Rust that's built
Yeah.
up. So you need to know these really broad concepts. And I think that, one of the things that shows is, look at how much tooling is being built in Rust nowadays, now that nobody has to actually suffer through learning Rust. And right.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So I think you're right. It's like, is the low level knowledge necessary? But now, do we want to focus
Yeah.
on this broad knowledge of
And
systems?
you need to know the concepts too, right? Like, so there's so many things that I want to say here. So yeah, like going back to your Rust thing, and I've definitely remember going through books and like, oh my God, this is super powerful, but you know, and yeah, like I think you need to know the concepts enough where like, hey, if there is a problem, and it goes, and I want to go back to AI now, right? Because when I think about the interview, and then we do this, right, where we're really marrying like, hey, in the real world, if you were here, you're going to have AI. So let's do that coding exercise, but you actually have AI. And oh, by the way, like, I'm not going to force you into like using some weird proprietary AI from some, recruiting tool when you normally use Claude Code,
Yep.
right? You want to use Claude Code for the interview? No problem. Let's do it. But I'm going to set it up in a way where it's going to like, the AI is going to maybe suggest some wrong things. Like, are you someone that is just going to take AI for face value, or are you going to, key in on that, right? And so you got to know concepts, like, so whether it's Rust or Golang or anything, right? I still think you need to know those concepts, and I would expect, and again, going back to what I would be looking for, right? If I was a junior engineer, like, you should be able to prompt your way to the right. Like, if you can prompt well, you should be asking the right questions. Like, hey, what are the concepts I need to know to make this highly available? I don't know. I'm just throwing that out there as the problem set there, right? And it's sort of like you can go deep on the fly, right? But you'd only be able to do that if you know what you don't know, right? Like,
Right.
okay, I know I need to make this highly available. I know I need to do this link shortener thing, and I care about how much data we're writing while we're reading, and and so like the way I would be prompting, like as long as I am aware enough to prompt right, then that to me is going to unlock so much, right? Someone who's curious, someone who's like familiar with, not scared of using AI and understanding how to apply it, I think is so much more important to me then, oh, they know the super intricacies of Rust. Again, like, listen, if your whole business is building a database or something, maybe you need those people. But like,
Yeah.
you know, I don't know if everybody is building a database or something where they need to know the super low level guts of Rust at every moment.
Yep, yep. And there's absolutely there's been those situations. I know with one of our products, I had a situation where it kept failing kind of in the morning, just strangely. And everybody, it's just a couple of days and we started getting more users and the thing is failing in the morning and I'm going through and it's on fly and I'm using AI and I'm quizzing it and it's giving me these suggestions. And I'm like, yeah, but the RAM is not spiking. I was like, this is clearly not, so it's like,
Yeah,
oh, you're
see?
right. And it's kind of like placating me around and around and around. And then, and I give it all the technology. It's still not getting there. And then finally I just like had this thought. I said, I'm using this Neon database. I go, is it cold starting? And of
Mm,
course, then the AI goes, yes, it does go cold. And I was like, all right, so it's taking too long to start, which is causing the timeout. And so but again, through AI, and then I was like, all right, now I'm going to make a change. Let's keep it always on. The problem goes away. And I was like, but if I had taken the AI wanted to make all these sorts of changes.
yeah,
And I was like, no. There's no evidence for the change. And so it
yeah,
still comes
yeah,
back to me because you got to realize that it is just kind of going through a set of steps that are
yeah,
usually wrong with things. And you
yeah,
still have to kind of think through. So I still think there's a lot of those types of problems that are going to happen as you
percent,
scale. It's
100%.
really, and then, like you said, how do you find that? That's the biggest thing is how do you use AI to find the things? So AI has just generated thousands of lines of code. Let's just say you're using TDD because you understand that's good. You've got good test coverage, but
Hmm.
and now without reading all the tests and all the code, how are you going to figure out if like these critical places
Hmm.
are correct? And it's do you launch a sub agent? Do you do yeah, there's a whole bunch of techniques for these types of things, I think. And what are the skills that you use and give it, and some of this I'm still figuring out, which was my other kind of thing is I was like, do I want I right now I'm keeping my skills with the repository. I wasn't
Right.
always on that train. I was like, oh, the skills should live on my machine. And then I go, oh, but now I have another developer working on this and I want
Yep.
them to have this skill I wrote for React because it kind of codifies everything that we're doing for this repo. But then I
Yep.
have to update the skill. And so then I
Hmm.
go, oh, but now I got 4 repos using the same skill and I want to make a
Hmm.
slight change. Do I change it based on the model? All these questions I'm not sure what I want to do with yet.
Sure.
so that's
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
so that's why I think that the entry level folks are having a little bit of a tough time because a lot of senior folks aren't sure what we're looking for yet
True.
either.
True. True.
so
Yeah. Interesting times.
very very fun times. Well, Jeremy, we've been going for a bit now. It's been an awesome conversation.
Yeah. It's great.
I love to wrap up with a few things, which is one is in this same vein. Last question is if you were an entry level software engineer entering the job market now, what would be your focus? What's your one piece of advice for people just starting their career?
Yeah. So it's interesting, right? Because, my daughter's 18 and going to school, in actually a few weeks and dropping her off. And so, I think a lot about this. I talk to my kids. I think, and they're not entering the job market yet, but, I'm going to the next step. And, you know, look, if I was a junior anything right now, going into the job market, I would ask myself, okay, like, how am I going to be relevant? Like, should someone care? Right. And so it's no different with the software engineer. How do I stand out? Right. And, you know, some of the things I just mentioned, it's interesting because just yesterday, the day before, I had a bunch of interviews with junior level candidates exiting, they just graduated. So this is very top of mind for me. And, those things that I mentioned is the guidance that I would give them, right? Like you've got to be you've got to stand out. You've got to be curious. You've got to, show that, you are a problem solver, that you can learn quickly. These are the things that we won't be able to teach you. We'll teach you the innards of like our code base and, how to use AI coding, tools if you're not like using them a lot. Cause some people, in their schools, they didn't get to use them. So they're only doing them in their personal time. Um, obviously from a resume perspective, like you've got to have some experience of some sort. Like every one of these candidates had multiple internships so we can have a conversation. If they didn't have that, it would have been a difficult conversation, right? So
Hmm.
like, before, that takes a little bit of prep time, right? Because this was like many years of internships, but I would make sure that you show that like you're not just going on the beach in the summer, like you're actually you're a hard worker. You got so good work ethic. You've got experience that you can talk about that is relevant. And obviously, and I hate to say it, but like you've got to know about these AI. You got to use the AI tools. So if they don't let you use it in school, pay the money. Like, there's like a lot of cheap options out there, but you've got to know these tools. They're going to use the tools and they're going to expect that you know how to use these tools. And if you don't, it's not looking good. It looks like you're just not passionate about the tech, right?
Right,
I think,
right.
I think it ultimately comes down to that. So if you're someone who's passionate, who's curious, who's, you know, has a good work ethic and can show that, um, I think, you're going to stand out. You're going to stand out as much as you possibly can. So, that's the advice I would give. Obviously like we're hiring, so come reach out to me and,
Amazing, amazing.
maybe, I'll leave it with that.
I love hearing that because it's definitely a really tough market. I tell people that when I got into this, I was lucky that there was such a supply problem with engineers. I was able to make it in without a college degree and really with that same attitude that you have, like I'm willing to learn and do anything. And I just kept running with it and I got paid. Like I basically on the job learned computer
Yeah.
science because
Yeah.
people were willing to do that. It's a little bit harder now to kind of justify that, but it's also, but again, there's new tools to learn, just like there always will be. So I still think it's a good degree field because you kind of look, you got to major in something, right? If you're going to go to college, you got to major in something, and this will at least teach you teach you something that I still think is quite useful, even
Yeah.
conceptually.
And even those
Then
like side projects, I'll leave just one quick thing. Even those
yeah,
side projects you do in your personal time, that shows like you're passionate, you're a tinkerer, you're going to learn a whole lot of stuff and could be very relevant to their business. So like, don't even discount that. It doesn't have to be an internship. Doesn't have to be like, something super official. Like even those things I think go a long way.
you know what? It's funny you mentioned that. I had someone when I was interviewing someone when I worked at the Not Worldwide. The interview went fine. It was one of the old school coding interviews, standard. We did the whole thing. Um, they didn't stand out, but they didn't do terrible, right? It was But then they said, "Before you go, I want to show you something I built." And
It's awesome.
it was
Yeah.
amazing. It
Yeah.
was it was it was really. It's like this. I just wanted to show you because I don't think it showed in the code interview. Like they were a little nervous, whatever. This is really what I'm capable of. And they were able to walk through the code and show me all
That's
these
awesome.
different. So, and I was like, you know what? This person just won me over in that moment.
Yeah.
That there was an opportunity. So I do agree with that. And even if you build something that already exists, this was something I was always like troubled by in my career. It was like, oh, I wanted to build this thing, but then I saw someone else already built it and I didn't. And then I go like, look at Mitchell Hashimoto. The guy built the
Hmm.
terminal, got a million users. We already had
Right.
terminals. And
Yeah.
now he's
Yeah.
building a multiplexer. We got two great multiplexers. I was like, I just switched multiplexers and he's building another one. So even if it's something like I'm going to build Claude code from
Yeah.
scratch, like
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I think building your own agent's a great project because it'll teach you a
Yeah.
ton about how they
Totally.
work. So even if you go and do that and can like take that into
Yeah.
an interview, I think that there's a lot to that side project thing that goes a long way.
100%.
Yeah. And
Good
then
stuff.
final question is, are there any books that you've recently read or in the past that you would recommend to folks to read?
Oh yeah, there's so many books. When I say books, by the way, like I'm an Audible, so when I say like the word read. It's really listen.
Listen.
Because I'll find time on the train or like now, my new thing is like I got this like home sauna that I go into.
Oh, nice, nice, nice.
you know, but and I'm all over the place. I mean, literally right now I'm listening to like Stephen Hawking's A Brief History of Time. I'm like just
Oh, yeah.
geeking out on like the theory of relativity, which just blows my mind, the whole time dilation stuff. Um, but some maybe more relevant books. You know, what is it called? Code. Let's see. Give me a second here.
Yeah.
One second. Here, give me 1 second to scroll my list. The Culture Code. That was
The
it.
culture code.
Culture Code. Great book. Um, read it. I didn't read it recently, but read it, a while back. But awesome, book that talks about like it starts out with this interesting thing, that real world test where they had like fifth graders going against like MBA grads, and they had to like build this structure that held an egg. And if you ask, well, who won? And every time it was like, the younger kids, and then you analyze why. It was talking about how, there was like no ego. They didn't just over engineer and give one chance. They were like trying a whole bunch of times. And it just talks about like the mechanics of like creative environments, creating creative work cultures. And there's examples throughout the book of like, Pixar's or like Apple and stuff. And like how, what are they doing? Like how do they, harness this like creativity? What are they doing to sort of like bring it around? So like, the Culture Code, that was a really good one. I have like a bunch of like philosophical books, that I'm into, like the Four Agreements. I'm a
But yeah,
big,
yeah.
I don't know if yeah. So
I've heard of that.
that's,
Yep, yep.
I always like reference that with like my kids. Um, so I'm all over the place. Yeah, those are like two that really like stick out that I recommend a lot. Oh, Delivering Happiness from a Customer Service Perspective. The Tony Hsieh book, about Zappos,
Yeah,
and
yeah. I love those examples, man.
that's like a great book if into customer service. Awesome book. So anyway, hopefully that helps. Couple
I
ones.
love that. Yeah, I would say that the Zappos model, that was very much how enterprise looked at it too. When we were there, it was really like, listen, that 5 out of 5 was a very real thing. And sometimes it's very tough. I had a conversation even with, my co-founder the other week. He goes, what's the right thing to do? And it was like a very tough situation. I said, don't build them, give them the work for free. And I was like, and just send them on. I was like, because they're unhappy. Which doesn't matter who's right or wrong. I'm like, the customer's
Yeah.
always right. My co-founder
Yep.
hates when I say that, but I said, this is the reality of the situation. I was like, it's just give them the work that they need. I don't want to have a battle, and I don't want to, you always want to say, because the reality is that customer coming back is the thing that's the most valuable to your business. And if you have a hard decision to make and you just say, hey, we're just going to do this favor for you, a lot of times they do come back. That goes a lot longer way than when everything goes right all the time.
Right. Right.
So
Good stuff.
very cool, Jeremy. It was very awesome to talk to you. I
Yeah.
had a great time,
Same.
and we will put some stuff in the show notes, and we will talk soon.
Amazing. Thank you, Michael. Appreciate it. Great chat.
Thank you. Oh.